In this video, we'll look at a technique that lets us dynamically push data to Power BI for processing and receive the results back to our flow. When it comes to summarizing data, Power Automate doesn't have a lot of built-in features to help you out. Since data analysis functions such as group by are not natively supported, this generally leads users to create loops, which can be slow to execute, tedious to debug, difficult to maintain, and have a high API transaction usage. Imagine you have a flow which runs on a schedule and retrieves data from some source such as a SharePoint list, Excel, CSV files, Azure DevOps, etc. The objective is to create a summary of this data to send out in an email. In Power Automate, the Power BI connector includes an action called Run Query Against Dataset, as shown here. This action allows us to execute a DAX query against a dataset in the Power BI service. We are going to leverage the data table function, which will allow us to include our flow data within our DAX expression, which we can send to Power BI for processing. Since this action requires us to specify a dataset that has been published to the Power BI service, we are actually going to publish a fake report, which contains no actual data, for us to select within the action to satisfy this requirement. Our fake report contains a single table called empty table, which has one column and no records. And here's a look at our demo flow, which has a manual trigger. The SharePoint Get Items action will provide 1,000 rows of sample data from a list named Task Statuses. Next, we have a select action, which will put our data from SharePoint into the correct format required by the data table function. The select action is building the actual rows for our table as indicated here. The expression behind the select uses the concat function to glue together the values of each property to build out each row of data for our data table function. Here's the expression in its entirety. Finally, we use a compose action to assemble our complete DAX expression. First, we have an inline table named static table department right, which we'll join our main data to in order to look up the department of each user. Then we have our main inline table named static table tasks left, whose data comes from SharePoint and whose rows were created from our select action. The expression takes the output from the select action and joins each row with a comma. Next, we use the natural left outer join function to join our two tables, resulting in a table named static table tasks extended. And finally, we use the group by function to group on department and assign to and calculate the various values shown using count x, average x, min x, max x, and sum x. The evaluate statement will tell Power BI to return the results of the group by expression. Power BI action references our fake report as it is simply a placeholder for these two required fields. This action uses the output from our compose action, which is our complete DAX expression, as its query text and sends it to Power BI for processing. Now let's run the flow and see what happens. You can see here that it actually took longer to retrieve the data from SharePoint than it did for Power BI to execute the query. As you can see here, the aggregated values are coming back as expected from Power BI. Here's a clearer view of the results. In addition to the calculated values, you can also see that department is included with our results thanks to our join. This demo used 1,000 records, and in my testing, I've observed it work with around 500,000 records. The main limit here is that Power Automate is limited to a 100 meg message size, so you'll need to do some benchmark testing if you have large data set. Another important note is that not all DAX functions will work with static or inline tables. Some require base tables, which are tables that are included in the Power BI model. For example, if you try to use Summarize, you'll get an error message stating that Summarize can only be used with base tables. One last note is that you can use the same fake report for all the flows that use this technique. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you need immediate assistance with your project, please use the link in the description to schedule a one-on-one coaching session. We'll have a Zoom call to troubleshoot your issues and discuss any questions you may have.